Boy, time is getting so short for this course. I only have, after today, 15 more days to teach, 5 more before I go to Europe and make a grand pause, which I'll tell you about later, so I'm so aware of that. I'm sorry if I'm talking fast. Some of my viewers said, hey, you're talking so fast now. Well, time is short. A correction, and thank you. Somebody commented that I was misquoting when I said I wandered lonely as a cloud. That was not Coleridge, that was Wordsworth. As a matter of fact, that was the poem Daffodils, which is a wonderful poem. I'm going so fast now, all I'm trying to do really is give a preview of coming attractions to students who later, say as 10th graders, ideally, they would run into these. Daffodils, a great poem. And there was a phrase, I didn't take the time to look it up, something about the romantics prized pleasure reflected in tranquility, or something like that. He saw a field of daffodils, and then later on he would remember that and it would bring him joy. I don't remember exactly what that phrase was. I could have looked it up. And in that process I was also reminded of the poem The Solitary Reaper by Wordsworth, which I don't have time for. I like Wordsworth. Wordsworth is easy compared to the others. He's often not regarded as great. Maybe not as romantic in a way, in that he's the sweeter side of romanticism. Ozymandias, this is a poem by, I think, Keats. Look on my work, she mighty and despair. There's just so much there. And I misquoted Robert Burns. Oh, would some power the gift give us to see ourselves as others see us, from To a Louse, where it was crawling on the rim of the hat. Legend of Sleepy Hollow, I mentioned that, but I failed to mention that there's a 1950s cartoon version of it. I think that the narrator might be Bing Crosby. I'm not sure. That's what I would use in school. Some of that, it's fun. Later on, this was made into kind of a horror movie, which I never saw, and I don't think Washington Irving would have really meant it as a horror movie. But all right. Anyway, I had said that we would go on to the Victorian era. I will in the second video today, but how could I forget? These two authors, these are still American authors. These two, I'm going to just squeeze in and comment quickly on them. Nathaniel Hawthorne, so highly respected. His masterpiece, I think most people would say, is The Scarlet Letter. I don't think I ever read the whole thing. I personally have an issue with New England. I'm from Pennsylvania, and I lived in New England almost like I was in exile for about 15 years, and so I'm not a New Englander. And Nathaniel Hawthorne was so much, well, all three of these, were so influenced by England, New England. And Nathaniel Hawthorne seemed to have a fascination with Puritan New England. Here's The Scarlet Letter, and as a Classics Illustrated. And what that letter was the letter A. It stood for adultery. The main character had committed adultery. She was married and she got pregnant, and there was no hiding it. And this was in a Puritan New England town. She was punished by having to wear a big bright red A on the front of all her clothing. But who was the father? You know, the mother couldn't hide it. Who was the father? Well, it turns out the father was the priest. And in a dramatic moment, he tears his shirt open and sort of confesses publicly, and here there's an A that has appeared on his chest, like a stigmata, like the wounds of Jesus appeared on saints who obsessed over that. He's so obsessed about the woman that he loved having to bear all the shame and him not. I respect it. It is highly respected. It is often used in high schools. In 11th grade high school, say, in America. Melville, Moby Dick, once again, I've never read the whole thing. I know the story. I've seen at least one movie of it several times. I am not a fast reader, so I don't do well with novels. But some people would say, here is the greatest novel ever written in America. Herman Melville. He also wrote Taipei, although I don't know how you pronounce it. Well, fiction writer is very important. But this guy, Henry David Thoreau, he didn't write any poetry. He didn't write any fiction that I know of. He was a philosopher. he wrote philosophy, you know, and you know, I don't know about you, but you know, I think who in their right mind would ever read philosophy for pleasure? But I have read Walden. And as a matter of fact, I think all Americans are probably to some extent influenced by Henry David Thoreau. I may be more than most. Henry David Thoreau went to Harvard. I went to Harvard. Henry David Thoreau had an issue with Harvard. He fought with the school over whether or not he should pay a tax, a tiny tax, for his diploma. He refused to because he didn't think it was right. And I guess he never got his diploma. He said, let the sheep keep its skin. Well, I didn't like Harvard either. I got my diploma, but I didn't like it very much. Henry David Thoreau was a school teacher for a while, but he didn't believe in beating kids. At that time, you beat kids with a switch if they were bad. And he figured if you have to beat a kid to learn, something's wrong. And he was, as I know the story, he was called before the school board and he was told to use more discipline. And the next day he singled a kid out and gave him a switching and quit. That's my version of the story. So he didn't succeed as a school teacher. Well, in my entire teaching career, although it was perfectly legal for most of that time, or half of that time in Pennsylvania, to paddle kids, I never paddled a kid. Anyway, he was big on field trips. I mean, some people say he invented the field trip. He was very much into nature. And he would take his students out into the fields to look at butterflies instead of sitting inside and reading about butterflies in a book. What most people know about Henry David Thoreau, though, is that he called it his experiment. He went to the woods, and for 2 years he lived by himself in a cabin in the woods near Walden Pond. And he wrote about the experience. He didn't turn company away, but he didn't want company. He built his cabin for himself for almost nothing. And his comment was, that I remember, was he was afraid that he would get to the end of his life and realize that he had never lived at all. He had just spent his time being busy. And so for 2 years, he was going to reduce life to its, what do you call it in math, its simplest terms. So there was life and nothing but life. He was going to get rid of all the busyness and just remove himself. And during that time he wrote this book. He died young. He was contrary. I don't think I would like him. I think a lot of people didn't like him. He had a friend, though, Ralph Waldo Emerson, a very highly respected writer and philosopher from New England at that time, who actually paid his tax at one point. Henry David Thoreau refused to pay his taxes while the United States was fighting the war against Mexico. Well, when I was a carpenter, as a young man, I had a boss. Don Booth was his name, and I was proud he was from Pennsylvania. But he was a Quaker, and he refused to pay his taxes while the United States was fighting the war in Vietnam. I don't know what happened with that, but anyway, he said things like he was sorry for somebody who owned 2 farms because they were burdened down by wealth. I think of him as there are 3 people in history that I think of that argued strongly that wealth does not make you happy. Jesus, St. Francis of Assisi, and Henry David Thoreau. Wealth does not make you happy, he felt. This is so romantic. He was so much an individual. He was so much into simplicity. He was so much into nature. I suppose his most famous quote, although one quote was, he would rather sit alone on a pumpkin than crowded on a velvet cushion. But his most famous quote, I believe, is this one, where if you watch, it goes something like, if you see people marching down the road and one guy seems like he's out of step, he's not marching with the others, maybe he hears a more distant drummer. And he said, let a man march to the drum that he hears. And you hear, he must be marching to a different drummer. Well, I think I could probably be said to have been marching to a different drummer by most of my community. All right, I probably forgot to tell you more about Henry David Thoreau, but so be it. I'm still going to give another video today. I do need to start the Victorian era, so come back.